There are three reasons I want to look at the book of Philippians right now, in this time that we're living, in the world that we're in. Let me just share why I think we need to study Philippians right now. Number one, Philippians reveals the mind of joy. Philippians reveals the mind of joy. 19 times in these 4 short chapters, Paul mentions the words joy, rejoicing, and gladness 19 times. He says those. He's writing this letter from a Roman prison, yet in spite of the danger, and in spite of all the discomfort, he speaks about joy, rejoicing, and gladness. So what was the secret to his joy? I think the secret is found in another often repeated word in Philippians, and it's found in this word, mind. Can you say that with me? Mind. One more time. Mind. Thank you. Mind. Yeah, everybody did it. 15 times. 15 times Paul uses the word mind or think in this letter. And so you know what that tells me? That tells me that the secret of Christian joy is found in the way that a believer thinks. It's how we think. Let me tell you how this letter, we can sum it up in 3 words. Outlook determines outcome. Outlook determines outcome. The ancient proverb writer said the same thing with different words in Proverbs chapter 23 and verse 7. He said this, as a man thinks in his heart, so he is. See, Philippians is a book that explains the mind of the believer must have if we're going to experience Jesus' fullness of joy in a world that's filled with all kinds of trouble. Here's a second reason I think we need to study this book right now. Philippians reveals a model of joy. A model of joy. When it comes to living with joy, what we really need is a demonstration, not necessarily an explanation. Agreed? Are you with me? Well, let me hear you. That's what we need. The Apostle Paul himself provides such a model. Of all the letters that Paul wrote to the churches, this letter is most personal. Paul's purpose in writing this letter was to thank the Philippian Christians for sending him a generous financial gift to support his ministry, and it was carried to Paul by a man by the name of Epaphroditus. And so that's what he sent them the letter for, but he wrote them simply because he wanted to express his gratitude, his love, and his concern for them. And this letter reveals more about the personality of Paul than any of the other letters that he wrote. At his core, Paul is a man with unconquerable joy in the midst of intolerable circumstances. I don't know about you, but I can certainly profit by studying and applying a model of joy like that today. Here's the third reason we're studying the letter. Philippians reveals the master of joy, and that would be Jesus. Philippians reveals the master of joy. Jesus knew joy, and knowing Jesus is joy. Can we say that again? Jesus knows joy, and knowing Jesus is joy. I like the phrase that Pastor Andy Stanley had recently coined this. He says, following Jesus will make your life better and make you better at life. Do you like that? I really like that. Following Jesus will make your life better and make you better at life. Jesus taught Paul how to live with joy in a joy-impaired world. Because Jesus taught that true joy only comes to those who've devoted their lives to something greater than personal happiness. Jesus put it like this in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 25. Whoever seeks to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for the sake of the gospel will find it. That's why one of the most surprising discoveries about genuine joy is this. Often, it's the people closest to suffering who have the most powerful sense of joy. Often it's the people closest to suffering who have the most powerful sense of joy. Friends of Mother Teresa. You know who Mother Teresa was? Serving the poorest of the poor in India for 68 years. One of her friends said this: instead of being overwhelmed by the suffering surrounding her, she glowed with joy as she went about her ministry of mercy. I love that. There is a man by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a minister in Germany when World War II broke out, and he was thrown into prison because he stood up against Hitler and the Third Reich and the Nazi regime, and they did execute him eventually. But one of the prisoners that was there with him said this: Bonhoeffer always seemed to me to spread an atmosphere of happiness and joy over the least incident and profound gratitude for the mere fact that he was alive. How many of you get up on Monday morning and you're so excited you say, I'm just filled with joy this morning. I get to go to work. I don't think too many of us do that, do we? We just aren't there yet. Friends, listen. If you and I are going to find joy in this world, it will always be in spite of something. It will be in spite of a virus. It will be in spite of rioting. The things that are going around us today, if we're going to find joy, it's in spite of those. And Paul understood this because Jesus, the master of joy, said this in John 16, verse 33. In John 16:33, in this world, you might possibly have a little bit of trouble. Is that what he says? No. In this world, you will have trouble. But take heart. Why? Because Jesus says, I have overcome the world. And so as we begin this study, as we begin to look at how we can enjoy the rest of our life, we're going to begin by learning to enjoy the people around us. Because people can steal your joy. Did you know that? People can steal your joy if you let them. If you let them. One of my pastor friends jokingly said, church is a great place to work if it wasn't for all the people. At least I hope he was joking when he said that. All right? Here's the deal. We have to live, we have to work, and we have to worship with people. We cannot isolate ourselves and still impact others for Jesus because, listen to this, there is no impact without contact. You hear that? There is no impact without contact. And sometimes coming into contact with some people, that can be pretty tough to take, right? You got those in your life? I do. But let me ask you a serious question. Do you enjoy the people around you? The people you work with? Here we go. I'm going to get personal here. The one you're married to? Yeah? Do you enjoy them? I just, you know what I've discovered? Is that most of us don't enjoy the people in our lives. We endure them. We tolerate them. We put up with them. So what does it really take to enjoy the people that are in your life? Well, Paul gives us some examples of things that we need to do in the opening of the letter that he wrote to the Philippians. Open, if you would, Philippians 1 and hold that. We'll be there very shortly. Take a look at this. The first thing that Paul says in Philippians is be grateful for the good in people. Be grateful for the good in people. In the opening of the letter to the believers at Philippi, he writes this in verse 3. I thank my God every time I remember you. Paul says, I like to remember the good things about people. I focus on the good times we have. I remember the positive experiences that we had. Now, even as Paul said that, he surely remembered what had happened to him in Philippi when he started this little church. Here's what I want you to do this week. I want you to take 15, 20 minutes, and I want you to read these 4 little chapters in the book of Philippians. Will you do that? Raise your hands if you'll do that this week. You'll read the 4 chapters. Okay, you read those 4 little chapters. Now, if you're online with us, put the thumbs up to say, yeah, you're going to read that. All right? We're going to read that. But before we read that, I want you to read Acts chapter 16. Because you see, Acts chapter 16 is coming from a historian named Luke. And it's his account of how Paul was treated at Philippi when he started out in the church. I'm just going to summarize a little bit of that. There was no synagogue in Philippi, right? Philippi was a Roman colony primarily inhabited by transplanted people from Rome. It was like a retirement community for older and wealthy citizens from Rome on the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, kind of like Naples, Florida is today. It's where the wealthy and the rich retire. So so he's trying to find some sort of religious meeting, and he hears that there's this prayer meeting at the river just outside of town. And there Paul meets a lady by the name of Lydia, who was a merchant. She was in the textile industry, and she sold this expensive purple cloth. She had converted to Judaism. She'd become a Jew. And so therefore, when Paul started to speak about this Jewish Messiah, her ears perked up because she wanted to know about this Jewish Messiah. And when Paul was done, she responded. And she was baptized along with her household. And Lydia was the first convert in Philippi for Paul. Now, everything seemed to be going pretty cool until a few days later when this young slave girl who had an evil spirit that enabled her to predict the future followed Paul and his buddy Silas around, and she was causing trouble. She was interrupting the work. She was calling the attention to Paul and to Silas in a way that they didn't want. And then Paul becomes Popeye. You know what I mean? I can't stand it no more. And so he was saying, I'm done. We can't do this. So what he did, he casted out the evil spirit. He casted out the spirit of the little girl, and along with it went her ability to predict the future. And her owner's ability to make money off of her. So her owners were so upset, they were so disturbed when they realized that they had just lost their income, that they had Paul and Silas arrested on some bogus, trumped-up charges for disturbing the peace. And Paul and Silas were severely beaten, and they were thrown in jail with no trial. What would you do if that happened to you? I'm going to tell you what, most of us, we'd just throw in the towel. We'd be done, right? You know what Paul and Silas did? They started singing songs about midnight. They started singing songs and praising God about midnight. And how many of you are even up at midnight? Come on, are you still awake at midnight? Not me. I'm done long before that. But they're singing at midnight. And it's amazing because there's an earthquake and it shook the chains off of them. The jailer did not know who Paul and Silas were, but he knew their singing had something to do with this earthquake, right? And so he asked the most important question that a human being can ever ask. What must I do to be saved? Paul simply answered this way: believe on the Lord Jesus. And then Paul went on to explain the gospel to him in more detail, and the jailer and his whole household were baptized in the middle of the night. So Paul started this church at Philippi with a business merchant, a former slave girl, and a prison keeper. Or maybe it was a wealthy proselyte Jew, a former demon-possessed teenager, and a Roman emperor worshiper. Or another way to put it would be a woman of high social standing, a girl of no social standing, and a man with low social standing. But that was Paul's core for church planning in Philippi. And so when Paul writes stuff like, I thank my God every time I remember you, he wasn't reflecting on a picnic that they had in the park. He wasn't thinking back about a Mediterranean cruise they had all taken together. That's not what he was thinking about. He had some bad experiences. And he could have dwelt on those. He could have focused solely on the painful memories, but he chose not to look at the stains of the past, but to look at the saints of the present. I want to give you some people principles today so we know how to get along with each other. Principle number 1 for people: remember the best and forget the rest. Remember the best and forget the rest. Maybe you've been hurt by somebody in the past, a parent, a partner, and you're still holding on to that hurt. You choose to focus on the stain. Now listen, I'm not saying that you should deny your hurts. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that you should repress painful memories. And I'm definitely not saying that you should excuse sinful actions of others who are spiritually and psychologically unhealthy. But if you want to move on in life, you will have to choose to focus on people's strengths and not dwell on their weaknesses. So many times I've heard through the years when I've talked to guys who maybe are having a little marital strife, they'd say, man, my wife is a good wife, but... and the wife would come in and she'd say, my husband's a good man, but. Anytime you hear that word but, it means that the emphasis is going to be on the negative and not the positive. One man said, nothing said before the but really counts. And I agree with that. He's a good coach, but. It's a good job, but. She has a good personality, but. We live in a nice house, but. That was a good sermon, but. Stop right there. Listen, but is a word that focuses on the downside. Paul could have said, I thank my God every time I remember you, but, boy, I didn't appreciate the way I was thrown into jail. No, instead, he remembered the best and he forgot the rest. That's an important principle for enjoying people. And one of the other things we need to do is to practice positive praying. Positive praying. Paul said these words in Philippians 1:4. In all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy. You know, I've heard people throughout the years, lots of people talk about the power of positive thinking. As a matter of fact, the town that I was raised in, Bowersville, Ohio, is a birthplace of Norman Vincent Peale, who is basically the founder of the positive thinking movement. He wrote a book, The Power of Positive Thinking. Right? It's good. Positive thinking is very good. There's definitely power in that. But I think there's even more power when we pray positively for people. Because listen, people can resist our advice. They can spurn our appeals. They can reject our suggestions. But they are powerless when we pray for them. Think about that. They don't have any power over that. Here's principle number 2. The quickest way to change a relationship from bad to good is to start thanking God for people. You want to change your relationship from bad to good? Start thanking God for people. Positive praying does 2 things. 1, it changes our attitude toward them. And number 2, it changes their attitude toward us. And when we begin to pray positively for people, the climate of the relationship will become much warmer. So often, we'll say to somebody, well, I'll pray for you. So what do you pray? What do you pray? Seriously, what do you pray when you say that? God bless them? God help them? Listen, folks, that's just too vague. Ain't nobody going to celebrate a vague victory, right? Nothing becomes dynamic, particularly in prayer. Nothing becomes dynamic until it becomes specific. And Paul gives us an example of that and some specific prayer pointers so that we can pray positively for others. The first thing he says is pray that they will grow and mature in love. This is my prayer, that your love may be abound more and more in knowledge and in the depth of insight. Secondly, he says, pray that they're making wise choices so that they may be able to discern what is best. Third, pray that they will do the right thing so they can be found pure and blameless for the day of Christ. And lastly, pray that they will live for God's glory, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ and the glory and praise of God. Now think about that. Praying positively for people. I think that's one of the qualities that Jesus is referring to when he tells us there's one identifying characteristic. How people will know that we're followers of Jesus, right? It's how much we study the Bible. Is that correct? Yes, no. Correct? No. Is it how much we pray? Yes or no? What's the characteristic? What? Love. That's the characteristic, the one characteristic that Jesus said that we need to have is to love. Again, Pastor Andy Stanley writes, following Jesus would not be about looking for ways to get closer to God who dwells somewhere out there, but Jesus' followers would demonstrate their devotion to God by the person next to them and in front of them. Jesus' followers were not expected to look up, but they authenticated their devotion by looking around. I was just sharing with Bob in Sunday school this morning, 10% up, 90% around. That come from Chuck Swindoll many years ago. Once you have that relationship with Christ, once you have that commitment to God, then the next thing you do is you look around and how can I put into place what I've already learned from Him? That's what it's about. You see, loving like Jesus loved is realizing that relationships, they're not just a part of life, they're the heart of life. Listen, friends, doing the right thing when it comes to love, it values relationships over achievement and over acquisition. When it comes to love, it means that our schedules become overloaded. We resist that temptation to start skimming relationally and cutting back on our time, our energy, our attention, right? Doing the right thing is when it comes to love, we won't allow what's most important to God to be displaced to what seems so urgent to us. And doing the right thing when it comes to love means that we understand that life minus love equals zero. Here's another thing we need to know as we learn to love those people around us, enjoy the people around us. Be patient with others' progress. Be patient with others' progress. Paul enjoyed the people around him because he looked at their future and not just their past. He saw their potential and was patient with their progress. Look what he wrote in Philippians chapter 1 and verse 6. Being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. Paul's proclaiming loud and clear that whatever God starts, God finishes. Now, we're not quite like that, are we? How many of you ever started a project and never finished it? Can I count them on, I'd have to take my shoes off to count the number of times I've done that. Right? We just don't finish what we start so many times. Max Lucado writes this, I love this. Pick up a high school yearbook and read the "what I want to do" sentence under each picture. You'll get dizzy breathing the thin air of mountain visions. Ivy League school, write books, live in Switzerland, physician in third world country, teach inner city kids. He says, and then take that yearbook back to the 20-year reunion, and you get to read the next chapter. Some dreams have come true, he writes, but most have not. Changing direction in life is not tragic, but losing passion is. Convictions to change the world are downgraded to commitments to pay the bills. Rather than make a difference, he writes, we make a salary. Rather than looking outward, we look inward. And we really don't like what we see because we don't finish what we start. Paul assures us that God will. God who commenced a good work in you will complete that good work in you. And so here's the principle to that. Number 3, God's not finished yet. God's not finished with people. Every one of us sitting here this morning, we are a work in progress, right? God's not finished with us. One day when we will be living in a resurrected bodies in this resurrected earth, and then we'll be just like Jesus because we'll see him as he is. And we'll be just like him. But you know what, friends? We're not there yet. That's not where we are. So God is in his biggest construction project right now. And it's us. I love the inscription on the headstone of Ruth Bell Graham. Ruth is the wife of famous Billy Graham, the evangelist. Listen to what her headstone reads. End of construction. Thank you for your patience. I love that. End of construction, thank you for your patience. She was inspired by that from a road construction sign that she'd seen years earlier. She might have been traveling through Indianapolis when she made that discovery with the road construction signs. Listen, if we're going to enjoy the people around us, we make allowance for them to grow as we expect them to let us grow. And Paul knew this was true from his own life. As a matter of fact, later on in this letter, listen to the words he wrote. I am not the man I used to be, thank God. But I'm not the man I'm going to be either. But I'm still pressing on to that goal. I heard about a wedding in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. The preacher asked the bride, do you take him for better or for worse? And she responded, he can't get no worse. And there ain't no hope of him getting any better. So I takes him as he is. And that's what we need to do. We need to take each other as is. Parents, listen, you're going to enjoy your kids. You got to enjoy them as is through this process of growth in life that they're having. Because listen, if we demand perfection from people in our world in order to enjoy them, then we're going to be miserable. Miserable. And the worst thing about that is we make everybody miserable around us too. See, I think the biggest mistake that we make with people is this. We tend to judge them by how far they have to go rather than how far they've come. Is that not right? We tend to judge them on how far they have to go rather than how far they've come. President Harry Truman, president back in the 50s, he once used the word manure in a presidential speech. This is the 50s, okay? He used the word manure. And there was one reporter that was there that took great offense to that. He couldn't believe that President Truman used the word manure in a press conference. And so Truman told his wife how upset this reporter was that he didn't really think it was appropriate to use the word manure in a press conference from the President of the United States. And supposedly, Mrs. Truman went to the reporter and she said, you don't know how long it took me to get him to just say manure. God isn't finished with people. He's not finished with me and he's not finished with you. And here's the last thing we need to do to enjoy the people around us. We need to love people from the heart. We need to love people from the heart. Paul planted many churches, and he loved them all. He didn't love them all the same way. They were uniquely and deeply loved. Like a parent that has 6 kids versus a parent that has 2 kids, and they wonder, how can you love 6 kids? Well, when you have 6 kids, you'll find out. Because there's enough to go around. And that's what Paul's saying. See, this letter exudes a level of endearment and enjoyment for this congregation unlike any of the other letters that Paul wrote. Look how he phrases it in Philippians chapter 1 and verse 7. Is it right for me to feel, it is right for me to feel this way since I have you in my heart. Do you know what I've discovered in my 60 years and almost 40 years in ministry? If I don't have people in my heart, then they're usually on my nerves. If I don't have them in my heart, they're on my nerves. Is that true with you? I mean, it's true with me. Heart love begins with understanding. Why does a guy at work act like that? You don't know his background. You don't know how he grew up. You don't know how far he may have come in the last 5 years. We need to have a level of endearment for people when we don't understand. Because it is so hard to love someone from the heart that you don't understand. Now, understanding does not make love automatic, but it does make it attainable. So if heart love begins by understanding, how do we understand? By asking questions. By listening, by being aware, and most importantly, with time. Time. It's not enough to say that relationships are important. We have to prove that by investing time into them. Words without time are useless. And this is interesting because Paul was literally doing time right? Because he loved people and he wanted them to know Jesus. He was in prison for no other crime than loving Jesus and loving others. He was a devoted follower. But he said, that's okay. It's all right. Really, the things that have happened to me have served to advance the gospel. But the essence of loving from the heart is not what we think or we do or we provide. The essence of loving people from the heart is how we give of ourselves. Men, I'm going to pick on us in particular for a minute, right? I learned this the hard way and way too late, all right? But men, we will hear our wives say, I don't know, or we'll say, I don't know what more my wife and kids want from me. I provide everything they need. What more could they want? They want you. They want your eyes. They want your ears. They want your attention. They want your presence. They want your focus. And they want your time. The best use of life is to love. The best expression of love is time. And the best time to love is now. Why now? Because we don't know how long we have. We don't know how long we're going to have this opportunity to love. Because circumstances change quickly, do they not? People die, children grow up, people move away. Folks, we don't even have a guarantee that we'll get home from here today. We need to do it now. Life is way too short to not enjoy the people around you. People can either steal your joy or they can seal your joy. The choice is yours. People can either steal your joy or they can seal your joy, and that choice is yours. So let me close just by asking some questions today. Who do you need to be thankful for today? Who do you need to say, I'm going to remember the best and forget the rest? Who do you need to say that to? Are you praying today, praying positive today for those around you? Are you praying that people will be filled with love and discernment, that they will do the right things? That they will live for God's glory? Who do you need to be patient with today and their progress? Who do you need to quit complaining about because of how far they have yet to go? No elbows to the spouses, please. We need to start celebrating how far people have come already. Who do you need to start loving from the heart and not just the head? Who do you need to understand better by listening, by being aware, and by spending time with them? Do you really want to enjoy the people around you? If so, it begins with you.